So let me start with the UN Convention, which of course was put into place in 1992, and whoever reads this convention and has some experience with other international conventions or treaties must say that this is one of the most important documents which have been agreed at the end of the last century. And by the way, it looks to me also as a kind of masterpiece of global or international diplomacy. First, of course, we are approaching a long-term vision, what is necessary to be done to keep the climate or the global warming in check. I want to make clear that in my opinion, the global vision is important, but not an operational goal or target. It is important because it gives guidance and it raises the sense of urgency of the negotiators, but it is not a concrete target which can be controlled in a kind of mid-term perspective. No one knows what will be in 2050, but we know what will be in 2015, and we still can envisage what will be in 2020. So I am arguing for more operational targets, for more mid-term targets, which then have to compare with what the contributions of the individual parties, the individual nations will be. And there lies another problem. We all know the discussions about the top-down and bottom-up approach. I will argue in my short presentation for the bottom-up approach. So whatever the global reduction will be, the reductions will always be an aggregate result of the national efforts of countries. While I'm not rejecting the visionary goals for general orientation, they cannot serve as a starting point for allocating national quotas derived from these global goals. Such a global top-down approach is neither practical nor politically feasible. So let me move on to another point where we have reached a broad consensus on the international level, and I can be very short on that. It's the principle of differentiated treatment or differentiated responsibilities between developed and developing countries. This is a principle which is also enshrined in the WTO treaty. I may come back to that too. There is also a broad understanding for the need of technology and financial transfers, helping developing countries to contribute to the climate change policy. Basing the negotiations on the best available science is a major underpinning for the negotiations. Of course, there are still, even in important countries, political constituencies which question that. I will not go too much into that. I just remember recently hearing the Czech president, which is certainly not a totally unimportant person, who joins those who doubt that climate change or global warming is man-made. Let me also mention the importance, and this is also codified in the convention, the importance of non-governmental organizations and civil society at large. There still is the old tradition of diplomacy where diplomats and governments are in charge of representing the will of their constituencies, of representing, in other words, representing the interests of their nation. And of course, climate change and the climate as a global common tool, good, is not a national issue. And I think the cross-border activity of non-governmental organizations, and they focus very much on their international networks, are the beginning of an evolving global, rational, democratic dialogue. Let me then say a few words to the emerging economies, emerging countries. And when I talk about emerging countries, I basically think of China, India, and Brazil. I even would personally leave out South Africa. But these three countries have joined the G20 recently. The G20 has been established, some of you may know that, as a successor of the G7, G8, as leaders to reform the global architecture to meet the needs of the 21st century. I'm saying that because this is also addressed not only to the old G7, G8 countries, but also to China, India, and Brazil. When you sit at the head table, then you get, of course, the right to influence major decisions. But at the same time, you take also enhanced responsibilities. China will be as dependent on the international cooperation as the rest of the world may depend on China. First, as I shortly mentioned, the discussion on legal binding or political binding or voluntary contributions seems to me, looking back on some other examples of international negotiations, a little bit academic. Because when we argue for a bottom-up approach, then it's the national commitment, the responsibility of national governments vis-à-vis their voters and constituencies to keep these targets and to implement these targets. One should not lose too much time whether Brazil or the United States or whoever commit legally to certain targets, but they at least, including, of course, countries like India, China and Brazil, including an effective MRV process. The argument which I heard that it's an intervention into national sovereignty is, for me, not acceptable, because the national sovereignty is for Luxembourg and for, let's say, Sweden as important as the national sovereignty of China. I'm after my international career, a strong defender of the consensus principle. Because if you have a majority vote, then you don't get all people on board, all countries on board. And it's finally the national decision of the country to implement. And you only implement what you really have voluntarily agreed to. In the best of all worlds, legally binding, internationally enforceable commitments would be better than political commitments in an ideal world. But we don't live in an ideal world. But they are, at this point in time, not in sight. Therefore, a more pragmatic approach, taking the Copenhagen Accord as the platform, has a better chance to produce tangible results. Thank you very much indeed.